The rain battered the windows of our Brooklyn apartment, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my chest. I stood by the kitchen counter, gripping a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold, staring at Julian across the room. A year together, and he'd never once reached for a hug. Not a brush of fingers. Nothing beyond the careful distance he kept like a vow. He sat on the couch, his dark curls catching the dim glow of the lamp, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Julian Carter was a man of quiet strength, a painter whose hands could weave entire worlds on canvas but seemed paralyzed when it came to me. Ethan Moore, the talkative barista with dreams of writing novels, had fallen for him anyway. His silences, his secrets, all of it. We met at a Greenwich Village art gallery, where his paintings hung like windows into his soul. I'd been serving coffee at the opening, sneaking glances at him as he stood awkwardly in a corner, avoiding the crowd. "Your work feels like a story I want to read," I'd said, bold and unthinking, and his shy smile had hooked me right then. That night, we talked until the gallery closed. About art, dreams, and the way New York could make you feel both infinite and invisible. By the end of the month, we were inseparable, sharing late-night walks, diner breakfasts, and a lease on this tiny apartment. But Julian's wall stayed up, his affection locked behind a barrier I couldn't breach. Tonight, though, something was different. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Julian's eyes, usually guarded, flickered with something raw, something I hadn't seen before. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the rain. "I need to tell you something." My heart lurched. I set the mug down, my hands trembling. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer, the hardwood floor creaking under my socks. He looked away, his jaw tight, and I braced myself for the worst. A year of loving him, of memorizing the way he hummed jazz tunes while painting, of learning to cook his favorite spicy ramen just to see him smile. It couldn't end like this. Could it? "I've been scared," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what it means to let you in." He looked up, and his eyes were a storm of guilt and longing. I grew up in a place where being me wasn't safe. My family, my town, they made it clear who I was supposed to be. I've carried that weight my whole life. I sank onto the couch beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, but not daring to touch. "Julian, you don't have to carry it alone," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm here. I've always been here." He nodded, but his hands stayed clenched. "I know. And I've wanted to. God, Ethan, I've wanted to hold you so many times. But every time I try, it's like my body freezes. Like I'm still that kid, hiding who I am." My throat tightened. I'd known pieces of his past small-town Georgia. A strict father. A church that preached love but practiced judgment. But hearing it now, seeing the way it haunted him, made me ache. "You're not that kid anymore," I said. "You're here, with me. And I love you. Julian. All of you." His breath hitched, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the rain. Then he turned to me, his eyes searching mine, and said, "I don't know how to do this, but I want to try." I reached out, my hand hovering over his, waiting for permission. "Then let's try together," I whispered. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers twitched, then slowly uncurled, brushing against mine. It was the smallest touch, but it felt like a spark, like the first crack in a dam. My heart raced as I closed the gap, my fingers intertwining with his. His hand was warm, calloused from years of holding brushes, and it trembled slightly in mine. "Ethan," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to hold back anymore." The words hit me like a wave. stealing my breath. I leaned closer, our foreheads almost touching, the space between us shrinking. Then don't, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'm right here. For a moment, we just sat there, hands clasped, the rain a soft chorus around us. It wasn't everything not yet, but it was a start, a promise. And for the first time in a year, I felt like Julian was finally reaching back. The next morning, the rain had stopped, and sunlight spilled through the windows, painting the apartment in hues of gold. Julian was already up, sketching at the kitchen table, his sketchbook open to a half-finished portrait of me. I paused in the doorway, watching the way his pencil moved, deliberate and tender, like he was pouring all his unspoken feelings into the lines. You're up early, I said, leaning against the counter, trying to keep my voice light despite the warmth spreading through me. He glanced up, a shy smile tugging at his lips. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. He hesitated, then added, good things, though. I grinned, grabbing a mug and starting the coffee maker. Good things. Huh. Care to share? He set his pencil down, his expression softening. You. Us. Last night. His cheeks flushed, and he looked down at his sketch. I've been scared for so long, Ethan. But holding your hand, it felt right. Like maybe I can do this. My heart swelled. I crossed the room and sat beside him, close enough that our knees brushed. You can, I said, and I'm not going anywhere. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw hope there, real, unguarded hope. It wasn't perfect, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. Julian's past was a shadow that wouldn't vanish overnight. But we had time, and we had each other. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. Julian started reaching out more small gestures, like a hand on my shoulder or a quick hug before bed. Each touch was a victory, a step toward breaking down the walls he'd built. We spent evenings cooking together, laughing over burnt pancakes, and nights talking about our dreams, his for a solo art show, mine for a published novel. New York buzzed around us, but our little apartment felt like a world of its own, a safe haven where we could both be ourselves. One night, as we walked through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet, Julian stopped suddenly. Ethan, he said, his voice steady but intense. I want to show you something. Tomorrow. At the studio. I raised an eyebrow. Curious. Your studio? The one you barely let me into. He laughed. A rare, unguarded sound. Yeah. I've been working on something for you. It's personal. My stomach fluttered. Julian's art was his heart, and if he was sharing it with me, it meant more than words could say. I can't wait, I said, squeezing his hand. He squeezed back, and for the first time, he didn't let go. Julian's studio was a cluttered sanctuary in an old warehouse in Dumbo, its brick walls lined with canvases and splattered with paint. The next day, I stood in the doorway, my breath catching as I took in the chaos of color and creation. Julian stood in the center, nervous but resolute, gesturing to a covered canvas in the corner. I've never shown anyone this, he said, his voice tight, but I want you to see it. I nodded, my pulse quickening. He pulled the cloth away, revealing a painting that stole my breath. It was us, Julian and me, sitting on our couch, hands almost touching, the city skyline glowing faintly behind us. The colors were soft yet vivid, capturing the tension and tenderness of that night in our apartment. My face, rendered with such care, held a quiet hope, while Julian's showed a man on the edge of letting go. Julian, I whispered, stepping closer. This is incredible. He rubbed the back of his neck, his cheeks reddening. It's how I see us. How I've always seen us. Even when I couldn't show it. I painted it after that night, the night I finally held your hand. I turned to him, my eyes stinging. You've been carrying this all along. He nodded. Painting is how I process things. Growing up, it was the only way I could be myself without anyone knowing. But with you, I want to be more than just the guy behind the canvas. I reached for his hand, and this time, he met me halfway, his fingers lacing with mine. You already are, I said. This painting, it's us. But it's also you, letting me in. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and pulled me into a hug. It was brief, hesitant, but it was everything. I felt the weight of his past in that embrace, the years of fear and hiding, and the courage it took to step forward. Over the next few months, Julian's touches grew bolder, a hand on my back as we navigated crowded subway stations, a brush of his fingers through my hair when he thought I was asleep. Each moment was a small revolution, a reclaiming of the intimacy he'd denied himself for so long. But there were still shadows. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring out the window, his expression distant, as if the ghosts of his past were whispering. One evening, as we sat on our fire escape, the city humming below, I asked, "Do you ever think about going back? To Georgia? To your family?" He tensed, his fingers tightening around his beer bottle. Sometimes, he admitted. Not because I want to, but because I wonder if they'd see me differently now. If they'd accept me. I leaned against him, our shoulders touching. Would you want them to? He was quiet for a long time, the city's pulse filling the silence. I used to, he said finally. But now, I have you. I have this life. Maybe that's enough. I wanted to believe it was, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. I knew love couldn't erase everything, not the years of rejection, not the scars that still made him hesitate. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed, loving him through the silences, hoping he'd find his way. Spring arrived, painting New York in bursts of green and pink. Julian's art was gaining attention, and a local gallery offered him a solo show. I watched him throw himself into it, painting late into the night, his passion spilling onto every canvas. I helped where I could, bringing him coffee, reading him drafts of my novel, keeping our little world steady. The night of the show was electric. The gallery was packed, the air buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses. Julian's paintings lined the walls, each one a story, but the one of us hung in the center, drawing whispers and admiring glances. I stood beside him, proud and a little overwhelmed, as strangers praised his work. You did it, I said, nudging him as the crowd thinned. You're a star. He laughed, his arms slipping around my waist, a bold move for him, especially in public. Couldn't have done it without you, he said, his voice low and warm. But as the night wore on, I noticed a shift. Julian's smiles grew strained, his eyes darting to the door. I followed his gaze and saw a man older, broad-shouldered, with a face that mirrored Julian's in its sharp angles. My stomach dropped. It was his father. Julian, I said softly, touching his arm. Is that? He nodded, his face pale. He wasn't supposed to come. I didn't invite him. The man approached, his expression unreadable. Julian, he said, his voice gruff. Heard about your show? Thought I'd see it for myself. Julian's hand tightened around mine, and I felt the tremor in his grip. Dad, he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. This is Ethan, my partner. The word hung in the air, bold and defiant. I squeezed his hand, my heart swelling with pride. His father's eyes flicked to me, then back to Julian. And for a moment, I thought he might walk away. Instead, he nodded. A small, grudging gesture. "Nice work," he said, gesturing to the paintings. "You've done well." It wasn't acceptance. Not fully. But it was something. Julian exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. As his father walked away, I pulled Julian close, whispering, "You were incredible." He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "I don't know if he'll ever get it," he said, but saying it out loud, it felt good. That night, as we walked home through the quiet streets, Julian held my hand the whole way, his grip firm and unapologetic. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Summer in New York was a sweaty, vibrant blur. Julian's show had put him on the map, and galleries were calling, wanting more of his work. But with the spotlight came pressure, and I could see it wearing on him. He'd spend hours in his studio, painting furiously, then come home quiet, his eyes shadowed. I tried to keep things light, cooking his favorite meals, dragging him to rooftop bars, but the weight of his past lingered. One night, as we lay in bed, the fan humming lazily above us, Julian turned to me. "Ethan," he said, his voice soft but urgent, "do you ever feel like you're not enough?" I propped myself up, startled. "What? No. Why would you ask that?" He stared at the ceiling, his hands folded over his chest. "I see you trying so hard, being so patient, and I'm still stuck. I love you, but sometimes I feel like I'm failing you." My heart ached. I reached for his hand, and he let me take it, his fingers curling around mine. "You're not failing me," I said. "You're trying, Julian. Every time you let me in, every time you touch me, it's enough. It's more than enough." He turned to me, his eyes glistening. "I want to be better. For you. For us." I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his. "You already are." That moment felt like a turning point. Julian started opening up more, sharing stories he'd kept buried about the pastor who'd called him an abomination, about the nights he'd spent painting in secret, terrified of being caught. Each confession was a step, and I listened, holding space for his pain. But the past wasn't done with us. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter on the kitchen counter, addressed to Julian in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. It was from his mother. My stomach twisted as I handed it to him, watching his face go still. "She hasn't written in years," he said, his voice hollow. He opened it, his hands trembling, and I sat beside him, silent but close. The letter was short, a plea for him to come home for his father's birthday. "She says he's been talking about me," Julian said, his eyes scanning the page. "Says he wants to see me." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Do you want to go?" He looked at me, his expression torn. "I don't know. Part of me wants to see if things could be different. But another part, I'm scared it'll just hurt again." I took his hand, squeezing gently. "Whatever you decide, I'll be there. We can go together." He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Together," he echoed. We booked a flight to Georgia, and the closer we got, the quieter Julian became. The small town he'd grown up in was a far cry from New York's sprawling fields, quiet streets, and a church steeple looming over everything. His parents' house was modest, with a sagging porch and a garden overgrown with weeds. His mother greeted us at the door, her smile hesitant but warm. His father, though, was a shadow in the living room, his presence heavy. Dinner was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. Julian's father barely looked at me, his focus on his son. "You've made a name for yourself," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Didn't expect that." Julian's jaw tightened. Didn't expect me to make it out of here. You mean? The room went silent. His mother's fork clattered against her plate. I reached for Julian's hand under the table, and he gripped it like a lifeline. I didn't mean it like that, his father said, his voice softer. I didn't understand you back then. Still don't. Maybe. But I'm trying. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. Julian's eyes softened, and he nodded. I'm trying too. That night, in the guest room, Julian pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me in a way that felt new, unguarded. Thank you, he whispered, for being here. I kissed his forehead, my heart full. Always. The trip wasn't a fairy tale. His father didn't suddenly embrace us, and his mother's warmth was tinged with caution. But it was a start, a fragile bridge between Julian's past and the life we were building. When we flew back to New York, he seemed lighter, like he'd left some of his ghosts behind. Back in our apartment, Julian painted with a new energy, his canvases brighter, bolder. He started touching me more freely, a hand on my cheek, a hug from behind while I cooked. Each gesture was a gift, a sign of the walls coming down. And I, in turn, poured my love into my writing. The novel I'd been working on taking shape, with a story inspired by us 2 men finding their way in a world that wasn't always kind. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Julian turned to me, his eyes bright. I want to do something big, he said. For us. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Bigger than a solo show. He grinned, a rare, mischievous spark in his eyes. Much bigger. Fall came, and with it, a crispness that made New York feel alive. Julian was a whirlwind of energy, planning something he wouldn't fully explain. It's a surprise, he'd say, his smile teasing, and I let him have his secret, trusting the spark in his eyes. Our life together had settled into something beautiful. Julian's touches were no longer hesitant to pull me into hugs, kiss my cheek in passing, hold my hand as we walked through the city. Each moment felt like a triumph, a testament to the love we'd built through patience and persistence. My novel was nearly finished, and Julian's art was thriving, his next show already in the works. One evening, he led me to his studio, blindfolding me with one of his paint-splattered scarves. No peeking, he said, his voice warm with excitement. I laughed, letting him guide me, my heart racing with curiosity. When he removed the blindfold, I gasped. The studio was transformed, lit with fairy lights and filled with his paintings, dozens of them, each one a moment from our life together. There was the couch from our first night holding hands, the Central Park path where we'd walked, the fire escape where we'd shared our fears. In the center was a new canvas, larger than the rest, showing us standing together, hands clasped, the city skyline behind us. Written in elegant script across the bottom were the words, "To Ethan, my home." Julian, I said, my voice breaking. This is everything. He took my hands, his eyes locked on mine. I've spent my life hiding, Ethan, from my family, from myself. But you made me want to stop. You made me want to live, to love, out loud. He paused, his voice trembling. I can't hold back anymore. I don't want to. Tears stung my eyes as he knelt, pulling a small box from his pocket. Ethan Moore, he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring. Will you marry me? The world stopped. I dropped to my knees, pulling him into my arms. My answer a breathless yes. We kissed, deep and unguarded, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise kept. The studio, the paintings, the city, it all faded, leaving just us, tangled in each other. Whole at last. The wedding was small, held in a Brooklyn garden with fairy lights and our closest friends. Julian's mother came, her smile tentative but genuine. His father sent a card, a small gesture that meant more than he'd ever know. We danced under the stars, my head on Julian's shoulder, his arms steady around me. As we stood together, watching the city glow, Julian whispered, "I was so scared to love you, but you made it safe." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. "And you made it worth it." Our life wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Julian's past cast shadows, when my own insecurities flared. But we faced them together, building a home filled with art, words, and love that no fear could silence. Julian's paintings told our story. My novel captured our heart. And every touch, every kiss, was a reminder of how far we'd come. A year ago, I'd stood in our apartment, aching for a man who couldn't touch me. Now, as I looked at my husband, his hand warm in mine, I knew we'd written a story worth telling, one of courage, love, and the beauty of breaking free.